Imagine a creature born of London's dark, forgotten waters. A spirit dredged up from the depths of the Thames, fed by centuries of pain and suffering. A ghostly figure that haunts not just the riverbanks, but those who dare to call its name. This is the Mudlark, a story of obsession, possession, and the terrifying power of the past. I'm Virgil, and today we're heading into the shadows of East London to uncover what lingers just beyond the edge of reason. Alright folks, Virgil here, back again. I'll be honest, today's not my best day. My head's pounding like a bass drum from a cheap hangover. I'm half sick with this flu that's been going around, and I've got a limp from something that's really not worth talking about right now. The Archive sent me out a case today. It's a bit of a weird one. Not that there's any other kind when it comes to my work. We're heading down to the forgotten little nook in East London, a part of Brick Lane that doesn't show up in any guidebook. Picture it. It's late afternoon, the kind of grey that swallows the city whole, rain drizzling just enough to get under your collar, and the alley I'm heading is just off the side of a little coffee shop that's seen better days. The kind of place where the air's thick with the smell of burnt espresso and damp brick, the walls plastered with band posters faded by rain. It's the kind of London you only end up in if you're lost, or something's pulled you in. There was something in the air, something heavy and cold, and it wasn't just the November chill. I felt it clinging to my skin the minute I turned the corner, like stepping into someone else's bad dream. The case started with a message passed through one of our field operatives. He'd gotten the story from a guy who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks, shaking hands, eyes wide, that haunted look people get when they've seen something they can't explain. He told a tale that was hard to pin down, rambling, almost manic, but there were key details that caught my attention, things that made it more than just another old ghost story. The man's name was Jack, and he was from a small town way off East London, the place with a heavy past, the place where the ground soaked in blood and bad history. But what haunted him wasn't from there. It had followed him. Jack said it was the summer of 2017. He'd gone looking for something Thameside alleyways, poking around places he shouldn't have. He was trying to make something, some kind of online series, he said, about some mythical creature he called the Mudlark. You see, Mudlarks were scavengers who used to comb the muddy shores of the Thames for anything they could sell, picking their way through filth, sewage, sometimes worse, back in the Victorian times, mind. Jack had this idea that if he could create the kind of right story, make it real enough, then maybe it could breathe life into the town. He wanted to give it some kind of eerie fame like Jack the Ripper had for Whitechapel. But there's always a danger in calling out to things you don't understand, because sometimes, my friends, they fucking answer. The acrid smell of decay and something earthly like wet soil lingered on Jack's breath as he spoke, his words rolling out faster than he could catch them. He spoke about how, after spending days of collecting footage of old mudlarking spots, he'd find himself on the coast of the Thames, knee-deep in mud and muck, and as he looked out onto the misty river, a solitary child was standing there staring at him, cold, thin, but just staring, with hollow, dead eyes, and from the distance, a sweet, siren-like melody, like his mother was crying out to him, singing him one last lullaby before he went to sleep. He'd then wake up, jolting out of bed, feeling like he'd never slept at all. And that's when the pain came in. He felt like his limbs were being torn apart. The doctors couldn't make sense of it. They'd ran tests, took scans, found nothing. Spent 10 days in a haze of agony, unable to move, barely able to think. Left him scarred mentally and physically. And though he got out of hospital, Jack was different. Something had marked him. His voice trembled as he described that feeling, the sense that something had followed him home, something that fed off of his fear. The music that woke him that night, the feeling of being watched even when he was alone in his flat. He'd fallen into a cycle of paranoia, losing his job, shutting himself off from everyone, as if isolating himself might protect others from what had lurked around him. And through it all, there was the Mudlark, not just a story anymore, but now a presence. A small figure from beyond, born of pain, watching, waiting. And that's when it got weirder. Jack spoke about time, how time itself seemed to bend around the Mudlark, how he'd lose hours, sometimes days, only to find strange symbols carved into his walls, even on his skin. He showed the operative a scar, 3 lines, like claw marks, that hadn't been there the night before. He believed that the Mudlark wasn't just hunting him, but trying to possess him, trying to make him part of his own twisted story. Now, I'm not one to scare easily. I've seen things that could make most people pick up and leave the city for good. But there's something about Jack's story that sat heavy in my gut. Resonance, maybe. The way he described these symbols. Old looking, carved into his skin. They matched things I'd seen before. Symbols tied to possession, to breaking of wheels. It wasn't just a haunting. It was a claim. The story intrigued me, and it got me thinking. Is the Mudlark real? Or is it some other kind of ghost, like a mimic who's mimicking the Mudlark? Was it simply a figure of Jack's imagination, desperate to become internet famous and find some sort of evidence of some famous creature that used to lurk around the areas he lived in, just to bring a bit of infamy to it? Who knows? What I did know is that whatever was going on in his flat, I had to check out for myself. So I grabbed my coat, had a quick cigarette, and off I went. As I approached the alleyway towards his flat, it seemed to darken as I stepped further in. The damp brick walls pressed in, narrowing the space. The air was thick, it was hard to breathe. And somewhere nearby, I could hear the distant clatter of cups from the coffee shop, the hiss of the milk steamer, the faint hum of life, all things that felt worlds away from where I stood. I had the address of the flat where Jack had been staying, a place above the shop that had closed down years ago, windows cracked, a place that no one seemed to want to stay for too long. Here I was. When I reached the flat, the door creaked open under the slightest touch. No lock, no chain, just swung open, revealing a dark hallway that led up to a narrow staircase. I could feel the temperature drop with each step. The smell of dampness was overpowering, mixed with something else, something metallic, like rust or old blood. I took in a deep breath, steadying myself. The thing about this kind of work is that you can't show fear. Whatever's lingering, whatever's watching, it feeds on that. Just like a dog seeing its prey. If you run, it chases. I reached the top of the stairs, my breath misting in the cold air. The flat was pretty much empty. Just a mattress on the floor, a few dishes in the sink. And there, on the wall, were the symbols, the 3 claw marks, scratched deep into the plaster, still fresh, like they'd been made that very morning. I could almost feel them vibrating, humming with a dark energy. The air felt around me heavy, oppressive, as if something unseen was pressing down on my shoulders. Maybe he was right after all, but is it actually a Mudlark? But that is when I heard it. A soft, low melody drifting in from the shadows, the same haunting tune that Jack had described. And then I felt it, its presence, cold, dark, creeping closer to me. Of course, my instincts kicked in, the hairs on my neck standing on the end. I knew I had to act fast. This thing wasn't going to wait politely for an introduction. I pulled a flare from my satchel, the kind I keep for emergencies just like this, and with a flick, It sparked to life, the bright red flame hissing and spitting light into the darkness, and in my other hand I had a wrist-mounted mini buckler, barely bigger than my forearm, but inscribed with something special, the Archivist cross. It's an ancient symbol tied to the stars in the night sky, one of the most powerful symbols for warding off evil spirits. I raised it above my head as the darkness seemed to close in. The Mudlark's presence, or whatever it was, stronger, pressed against me, trying to get into my head. My soul. I could feel it like icy fingers trying to pull me apart from the inside, but I held my ground. The Archivist cross glowed faintly in the flare's light, and I could feel the pressure ease just enough for me to push back. The flare burned bright, casting monstrous shadows against the cracked walls, and for a moment, I could see it, a small boy-like figure, but twisted, taller than it should be, and surrounded by this tall, monstrous shadow, watching from the edges of the light, its eyes like dark pits. I shouted, my voice hoarse but steady. "You have no power here, vile creature!" The Mudlark recoiled, the shadows twisting, retreating from the flare's light. I held the buckler in front of me, using it as a shield, forcing the thing back step by step. But I knew I couldn't hold this off forever. This was a fight for the specialists, the ones who dealt with this kind of malevolence on a daily basis. With my free hand, I grabbed my radio and called it in, back up from the archives. The exorcism branch specifically. "This is Virgil, requesting immediate support at the target location. Entity engagement confirmed. It's a strong one. Bring the full kit." My voice shook, but I managed to keep it steady enough. I had to hold on until they arrived. Minutes felt like hours. My arm was burning from holding the buckler high, my eyes stinging from the flare smoke. The Mudlark seemed to waver, its form flickering, never fully retreating, but not daring to attack either. It was a standoff, and it was taking everything I had to keep it that way. Finally, I heard it, the pounding of boots on the stairs, the cracking voices of the radios, and the doors burst open. The specialist team flied in. Their own flares lighting up the room, they moved with a purpose, their chants filling the air, drowning out the melody that haunted Jack and now threatened me. Slowly, the pressure eased, the darkness receded, pulled back by the combined force of the Archives exorcist and the Met's own occult branch, AFO officers, that is, Authorised Firearms Officer. Their Heckler and Koch MP7s raised, each weapon special issue from the Vatican, anointed silver rounds gleaming in the dim light. They moved with precision, their formation tight, exorcists chanting prayers of banishment while the officers covered every corner of the flat. The air crackled with an energy of the combined efforts, and as the Mudlark let out a guttural, ear-splitting wail, one of the officers fired a volley of silver rounds, each bullet inscribed with holy symbols, forcing the entity further back. It writhed, its form flickering violently, unable to withstand the assault. One of the exorcists stepped forward, raising a vial of blessed water and holy salt, threw it directly at the entity, steam hissing as it made contact. The Mudlark shrieked, its form dissolving into a dark mist, dissipating into nothingness as the team continued their chants. And then, and only then, the room seemed to brighten, the oppressive darkness lifting entirely, leaving only the cold air and a sense of stillness behind. The Mudlark let out a final, almost mournful wail before it was forced out, its presence dissolving into nothing, only the cold November air and the sense of a burnt flare in its wake. I slumped against the wall, breathing hard. My body ached, bruises already forming where I'd strained against the entity's grip. I glanced at the specialists, giving them a nod of thanks as they began their work, cleansing, sealing, making sure this Mudlark won't come back, at least not here. My final thoughts are mixed. Clearly it was a malevolent spirit that had succeeded in possessing Jack and had tried to possess me. Clearly I did see at some point The image of a small Victorian orphan who would look like the description of how we would see a mudlark. But why was it a malevolent spirit? Why had it left its home and followed Jack here to the flat? And what was that huge shadow that shrouded it? My thoughts are that the spirit of a mudlarker who died in the Thames in the Victorian period was there. And when Jack went to try and find this being, his obsession had led for another malevolent spirit such as a mimic to take over the spirit of the mudlarker and use it as a vessel to torment Jack. This one's a tricky one, and although I think we've destroyed the spirit, I think the original entity that possessed the mudlarker is still around, probably back at the Thames. This one will need some more investigation, but I think I'll leave that for another time. This account's going in section Delta -4 under attempted possessions and curses. The mudlark, or whatever you call it, is still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for someone else to call it back. If you ever find yourself drawn into old stories, dark tales that seem to echo through the years, remember, some things are best left forgotten, because sometimes when you look into the darkness, it does look back. And always stay safe, everyone. Until next time, this was Virgil. Welcome back, listeners, and for those of you just joining, you found yourself a little portal into the world of the Bethnal Archives. My name is Felix, and I am the head archivist here. Today I'm giving you an overview of the Bethnal Archives themselves, who are our staff, and also I'll be introducing 2 new podcasters who I work with on a daily basis who will be contributing to this wonderful channel Joe the Intern has created. We're broadcasting in a sense from deep below the streets of London, hidden in a labyrinthine vault of old knowledge and older shadows. The archives aren't some dusty basement of relics and records. They're something like a second city beneath the city, a place where what doesn't belong in the world above can be catalogued, studied, and, when necessary, contained. I've been here most of my life, and I suppose you could say the archives themselves are as familiar to me as the back of my hand. Oh, that's a new mole? Little joke. The archive isn't a single room, or even a set of neatly stacked hallways. It's a network of floors, chambers, stretching further down than most would believe. We occupy a corner of Bethnal Green, though you wouldn't know it from the outside. Just a nondescript door behind a row of shops, mostly forgotten. An iron door that won't budge unless you have the right key, and even then it's not so straightforward. If you're meant to enter, you'll find your way. The archives themselves are divided into floors, each floor dedicated to a different category of phenomena, though in a place like this, categories are often mere suggestions. On one of the top floors, we keep our more innocuous finds, Class 1, Class 2 cases, normally harmless spectral sightings, objects with particular but safe histories. Floors further down are where things get complicated. The lowest floors are where we store Class 6 and above, malevolent entities, dimensional artifacts, and the odd cursed relic that refuses to be classified. Day-to-day operations, though, are far from as neat as those classifications might imply. We don't start the day by pulling files into a simple sequence. We're more likely to spend it extinguishing proverbial fires. Every morning I take stock of new items Virgil's brought in overnight. Virgil, of course, our freelance field agent. You might have heard some of his other stories here on the channel. He was known to drag in the strangest finds. Recently he brought in an old mirror from an abandoned flat in Shoreditch that was giving people strange dreams just by walking past it. Turns out it was a Victorian witch glass used for warding off spirits. Simple case really, but one that needed the right touch to neutralize. After a quick sweep by Rue Fennick, our security specialist, and a series of containment charms, we moved it to one of our upper floors, filed it away, and made sure it couldn't cause any more trouble. Of course, then there's Dr. Imogen Grant, she's a character, who often begins her day at dawn down in the lab. Imogen's our fully trained pathologist in animals and humans. She's the one who dissects whatever peculiar biological remains come our way, determining if we're dealing with an animal, a cryptid, or maybe something else entirely. Last week she spent 3 days on what we initially thought was a particularly large batch from one of Virgil's nocturnal expeditions, only to find out it had vestigial hands, a remnant perhaps of something much older and more unsettling. And that brings us to categorization, a daily necessity, though not one we take lightly. Our case classification system is our lifeline, though it is a bit of an evolving beast. We've divided cases into types based on threat levels and types of supernatural phenomena. There are 7 main classes, from class 1 being benign phenomena, like your friendly spectres and residual hauntings, all the way up to class 7, which we classify as unimaginable due to their unpredictability. We keep those ones under strict lock and key, and for good reason. They're stored far down behind every ward and seal we can manage. Anything that defies standard containment measures ends up down there, guarded by layers of magic, iron, and bureaucracy. Yes, the bureaucracy. Let me tell you, for every haunting or cursed artifact that ends up in the archives, there's a stack of paperwork thick enough to choke a ghost. Each item is tagged, cross-referenced, stored within a record of its classification, its origin, its containment instructions. I spend hours every week dealing with government forms, often redacted to the point of absurdity, though they insist on them as part of the process. And it's not just government forms. We're also bound by agreements with local and international organisations. Of course, there's the council, called the Metropolitan Advisory Board on Paranormal Activity, MAPPA for short, and they require quarterly reports. Each report is a bureaucratic maze of clearances, classifications, and signatures. Even the Met Police have officers assigned to the archives, making sure we follow protocol. Not that they're always helpful. The police presence down here is relatively new, to be honest. There was a time when we managed without much oversight. Back when the exorcists were an entirely separate faction. Collection of priests, mystics, and spiritualists with their own methods. They'd come down here to borrow items, cross-reference cases, or consult on particularly troublesome exorcisms. We worked alongside them, back when they saw us as allies rather than merely an extension of government red tape. But then things changed. Cases became more violent, and after a series of uncontained hauntings in East London, the Met insisted on a more formal arrangement. Now we have what we call the police priests. They are part of the Metropolitan Police's occult branch, of course highly secret, and they are trained at the Vatican. They are armed with blessed firearms, doused in holy oil. They are our first line of defense in high-risk incidents, and they are not to be trifled with. Rue works closely with them to ensure our containment procedures are up to standards. It's not the perfect arrangement. While they are useful when cases call for brute force, they're less keen on the subtleties of cataloguing and research, which makes them wary of the archive's operations. Then, of course, there's our Global Affairs Officer, Edward Warrington. He's another key player. You'll be hearing from him, I think, possibly tomorrow. Though he's rarely seen on the ground, Edward monitors paranormal events outside the UK, and his office is a world of its own. A fortress of classified files, global threat maps, and red-inked notes on foreign incidents that might drift into our jurisdiction. Edward is our silent guardian against the international supernatural crisis, and he's the one who tips us off to any intercontinental connections. A haunting in Paris may link back to a relic stored in Edinburgh, or a possession in the Philippines may link to some ritualistic pattern that we could use here for something we've got going on. Edward keeps those pieces together and lets us know when to be on guard. As for me, well, my history is tangled up into the archives themselves. I joined nearly 3 decades ago, fresh from university and convinced I'd be documenting Victorian architecture. I must admit it was a bit of a shock to learn that the architecture was the least of it. My first case was a small one. I do remember it like it was yesterday. The kind we categorize as Class 2, harmless but reoccurring sighting of a woman in grey. It was a simple phantom lingering at a boarding house, there in Limehouse itself. Harmless enough, but there was something about her that seemed to me to be waiting. It was my introduction to the archives, a peculiar blend of mystery and melancholy, and it was from that moment I was hooked. Back then things were simpler. The archives weren't as vast, not as complex, and entities we dealt with felt smaller. Over the years, however, the world outside has darkened. The cases have grown bolder, and with this shift, the archive has had to evolve, which means more staff, more containment protocols, and far more paperwork. I spend hours some nights, pen in hand, filling out forms for cases, making sure every box is checked so no bureaucrat can come down and question our methods. It is tiresome but necessary. You see, one loose end, one forgotten form, and we're answering to the higher-ups. And then what happens? We'll lose our independence. And let's not forget about the cases themselves, the very heart of what we do. You want stories? Oh, we have countless. There was of course the Mudlark at Brick Lane, a malicious entity that crawled its way out of the Thames and nearly took Virgil with it. Class 7, I believe, with traces of Victorian vengeance so deep it still troubles Virgil's dreams. Then there was the phantom carriage of Whitechapel, a spectral vehicle that would appear out of nowhere, dragging its unwilling victims into an ethereal fog. That one, believe it or not, was a joint operation with the police priests, their blessed firearms managing to slow it down long enough for the exorcisms to perform their rites. I don't think I've actually told this one on the podcast. That's one for the future for sure. And then of course there's the red orbs of Covent Garden. That was a temporal rupture. Class 5. The orbs would drift down alleyways, leading those who followed them into a forest that shouldn't exist. A place where time seemed to stretch and fracture. We did manage to finally contain them, but not before a few poor souls had lost days, even weeks to the impossible wood. The archives are a place of vigilance. Each of us has a part to play. The day starts with cataloguing, of course, yes, but there is also maintenance. Every floor must be checked. The wards have to be tested. Containment spells refreshed. Of course, then there's the usual stuff like fire alarms, PPE, and all of that lovely stuff. Eliza works in the archives' shadowed reading rooms, combing through folklore to trace any links to new cases. Her expertise has saved us more than once, piecing together connections that our classifications might alone overlook, and Rue ensures that all the physical barriers are secure. Of course, then there's our wonderful intern Joe. Hey Joe, he's just looking at me now, who made this podcast impossible. He handles digitizing our older records and ensures we have backups of everything. He's taken on this project of broadcasting our stories to you, the outside world, and as reluctant as I was to agree to it, I'm starting to see the appeal. Maybe you'll sleep a little sounder knowing that someone, somewhere, is watching in the shadows. And so, dear listeners, this is our world. Day to day, down here in the depths of the Bethnal Green Archives, we work in the dim glow of old bulbs, our breaths mingling with the dust of centuries, our minds on whatever new cases lurk out of sight. The archives are vast, but they're also, in their own way, a sanctuary. Each artifact, each haunting, each document we add to our shelves, it is a reminder of the strange and enduring nature of humanity. It's easy to forget with all the routine and red tape that there is a purpose to our work, a reason we catalogue, classify and contain. We're here to keep the balance, to make sure what lurks beneath doesn't rise up too far, and perhaps, as Joe insists, There's something reassuring in sharing this work with you, knowing that the archives don't stand alone. So stay tuned in, stay curious, and if you're over in East London and you feel a prickle on the back of your neck, it's likely nothing, but perhaps, just perhaps, it's something waiting to be archived. Of course, don't forget, please follow, subscribe, like, even comment. All of them things keep us invigorated in creating more content, and let us know that you listeners at home are enjoying. I've got quite a busy week, so I won't probably be back till next week. However, I've heard that Edward has been doing some fantastic podcasts with Joe, and also Dr. Imogen has done her very first podcast talking about some of the things that she dissects down in the lab. So they sound great, and I'll be definitely tuning in as well to listen to them. Until next time, I'll see you later.
There's an image that's haunted the edges of our collective nightmares for centuries. A figure as tall as the shadows, faceless, arms like spider legs stretching out into the darkness. Known in every corner of the world by different names, feared in every culture for reasons that seem to slip just out of reach. Tonight, we're diving into the twisted history behind Slender Man. A figure who's haunted the alleys of London and the black forests of Europe long before the internet ever gave him a name. Is he one creature or many? Is there something ancient lurking in our stories, hiding behind each faceless, tall figure we claim to see? Keep listening to find out, but only if you dare. Hello, Edward here, and welcome back to the Archives. I'm the Global Affairs Officer, responsible for logging and categorizing the uncanny that isn't necessarily a direct threat to His Majesty Britannia. Today, it's damp and grey as usual, with just enough mist settling over East London to remind us that we're never too far from the past in this city. You can practically feel the history seeping through the walls. Now this morning, a new archivist wandered in. I've been asked to babysit the lad, poor thing, though lad might be pushing it. He's 32, fresh-faced but sharp. He's already got level 3 clearance, which surprised me. A bit young for that, usually takes years to earn. But rumour has it he's been fast-tracked over from Westminster. So, you can imagine my interest. Westminster doesn't just hand out level 3 clearances like sweets. If he's here, there's a reason, and I intend to find out what. So there we are, barely introduced, and he asks me one of the most loaded questions I've had in a while. Edward, he says, what's the story behind the Slender Man? I looked at him for a good minute, maybe 2. Now, it's not unusual for someone new to ask about the Slender Man. He's one of those names that circulates even among the skeptics. But hearing it from this fresh recruit, just a couple of hours into the job, it had me intrigued. It told me he was either very curious or a touch reckless. Well, dear listeners, tonight we're going to pull back the curtain on the Slender Man. Not the internet's version, the real story. The one that lives in dusty archives and in the whispered legends of places far older than London. I've logged more accounts than I can count of faceless watchers, impossibly tall men, and silent shadows that haunt the boundaries between our world and something else. Shall we? Now, let's start with an account from 1721, deep in East Anglia. This one's lodged in Section Delta 3, Cursed Earth and Haunted Lands. I found it years ago, hidden between papers marked irrelevant by some past archivist who clearly didn't see the patterns. It's from a young woman named Mary Ashcroft, who claimed to have seen a figure near the edge of her village, standing just where the dark of the forest began. Now, this wasn't just some traveller passing through. Mary described the figure as impossibly tall, too thin to be any man, with no face to speak of. But the part that always gets me, the detail that stays with you, is how she said it was staring at her. No eyes, no face, but she swore up and down it was looking right through her. Most of the villagers dismissed her, naturally. It was 1721 after all, and women's tales were often chalked up to hysteria, as if fear was something unique to the feminine mind. But over the years, more accounts popped up, scattered across different villages. Each report described something eerily similar. A figure at the edge of town, standing silent and still, just watching. No one could say what it wanted, only that it was there. That's the thing about these stories. The Slender Man, as he's called now, didn't start on the internet. No, he's always been there, lurking in our old myths and fears, taking whatever form each age offers him. Fast forward a bit to London, 1887, and we get a strange report from a man named Charles Bradley. Now, Bradley was a physician, but he had a peculiar interest in the occult, as many of that era did. It was a foggy night in Whitechapel. Perfectly cliched, I know, but bear with me. Bradley was on his way home from an inn when he spotted a tall figure standing beneath a gas lamp, half obscured by the fog. No face, or not one he could discern, but a presence that he later described as scrutinizing him, as though he were being measured by something inhuman. Now, here's where it gets chilling. Bradley said he felt an overwhelming sense that this figure was peering into the darkest corners of his mind. Can you imagine that? Just some faceless figure standing there exposing you to yourself? Bradley didn't last long after that. He died a week later. Suicide, they said, though the details remain murky. But what he left behind is enough to make anyone's skin crawl. His journal, which I keep in a locked case, is filled with frantic, obsessive sketches. Over and over, he drew that faceless figure, tall and silent, just out of reach. Sometimes he added hands, stretched long spider-like, as though trying to touch him from afar. It's a sight I wouldn't recommend for weak nerves. And let's not forget our neighbours across the channel, eh? In France, they call him l'homme des bois, the man of the woods. This figure appears at dusk near the forest's edge, watching, waiting. In Germany, he goes by Der Grossmann, a figure that haunts the Black Forest, reminding children to stay close to their fires at night. They say he punishes those who dare to defy nature's rules, those who wander too far into the woods after dark. Here's the thing, though. These older versions of the Slender Man, they aren't as single-minded as the creature we talk about today. They aren't malevolent by nature, nor exactly benign. They're like guardians, or maybe more like boundaries themselves, marking the edge of our world and something else entirely. They remind us of limits we're better off not testing. Then we come to London during the war, 1944, a particularly dark time for everyone. Bombs dropping, lives changing in an instant. That's when a young girl named Elsie reported seeing something near the ruins of her house, which had been hit during an air raid. She was trapped under debris, unable to move, and in that darkness, she saw it. A figure standing in the rubble, impossibly tall and thin, arms stretched out as though trying to comfort her, but each movement seemed to fracture the air around it, as if merely existing here was painful. She lived to tell the tale, but was never quite the same after. Until her dying day, Elsie swore she'd seen something real, something that wasn't human but wasn't a ghost either. So is Slender Man real? I paused, letting the question echo. In a sense, yes, but not in the way people think. He's real like fear is real, like stories are real when we give them enough weight. These figures, these faceless watchers, they aren't single beings. They're manifestations of something old, older than any name or shape we give them. They are drawn to fear, to the times when our world feels fragile. I know, it sounds fantastical, but after decades cataloguing these cases, reading through the whispered testimonies and fevered sketches, I've learned something. These figures, whatever they are, aren't solitary. The Slender Man is only one of many masks, one form among countless others. So next time you're out alone and you feel something watching from the shadows, remember, it may just be the Slender Man, or one of his kin. And they're never as far as you think. The scent of damp stone and paper fills the room, thick and heavy as I settle into my chair. The faint sound of rainfall taps against the distant glass above me, echoing through the Bethnal Archives. This is East London, and today, like most days, it's a slate-grey sort of morning. Fog has rolled in thick as cream, coiling through the streets and seeping into every crevice of the city. If you know where to look, you can practically feel the history lurking, thick as the mist, in this old place. Hello, Edward here, Global Affairs Officer, responsible for logging and categorizing the uncanny that isn't necessarily a direct threat to His Majesty's Britannia. Today I'll be answering a question some of you, our ever-curious subscribers, have been asking. A creature not exactly native to these English shores, but one whose name still carries weight and wonder. Our intern, who's been helping produce these episodes, mentioned a flood of comments about something called Siren Head. Now, Siren Head's a creature that's taken on a life of its own in recent years, but as it turns out, I did come across something in the archives that might just shed some light on this entity. I've learned Siren Head isn't quite a British phenomenon, not traditionally anyway. Its roots run deepest in North America, particularly in dense, wild regions where the land itself feels old, where nature grows unchecked. So, I took it upon myself to make a call during yesterday's lunch break to our liaison in Salem, Massachusetts. It's good to compare notes now and then, and if there's one place with peculiar findings to spare, it's Salem. With the help of some key details they shared and a late night spent with my wife's ancient tippy-tappy lap-tap, as she calls it, I gathered quite the collection of notes. Here's what I found. The first documented sighting of something resembling Siren Head dates back to 1938 in the dense woods of British Columbia, Canada. Now picture this, a logging camp isolated by miles of forest, surrounded by ancient trees that seem to press in on all sides. The air here would have been thick with the scent of pine and sap, the kind of forest where it's always cool underfoot, and the only sounds are the steady chop of axes and the occasional whisper of wind. And yet, come nightfall, something else began to break the silence. The workers reported strange, dissonant sounds echoing through the trees. They described it as a siren, but twisted, distorted, as though whatever was making the noise was struggling to mimic something it didn't fully understand. At first, the men tried to brush it off, calling it a prank or an unusual animal call. But the nights wore on, and with them, so did the eerie siren sounds, rising and falling through the trees like something searching for attention. Then one evening, one of the loggers claimed he saw it. A figure at the edge of the camp, standing tall, taller than any human. Its head was topped with two rusted, old-fashioned sirens, the kind you'd see on war footage or hear during an air raid. The figure moved awkwardly, as though it was something that wasn't meant to be moving at all. With each step, the sirens let out a low, static-laden wail that seemed to shake the air itself. And then, as quickly as it had appeared, it melted back into the trees, leaving behind only the sound of fading static. The scent of burning metal and the heavy quiet that follows an echo must have filled that camp. By the end of the month, the workers had abandoned it entirely, leaving the tools to rust and the fires to go cold. To this day, that forest remains untouched, avoided, as if people can sense there's something otherworldly about it. Now, 1938 might be the first recorded encounter, but strange siren sounds in remote areas pop up far earlier, particularly in places where the woods are deep and the towns are small. There's an old folktale from rural Russia about a creature called the Banshee of the Pines. Picture the smell of fresh snow, the cold bite of mountain air, and the tall, looming pines. The townspeople described a skeletal figure with a strange contraption on its head that would emit a mournful wail just before disaster struck. Whether war, famine, or death, the Banshee's call came as an omen. I've come across similar legends across Eastern Europe and the American Midwest, where folks would hear strange, hollow wails that signaled a coming storm or calamity. Siren Head, or something like it, has always lurked on the fringes of human settlement, a kind of ancient harbinger. And yet none of those old folk tales quite capture the same eerie, mechanical precision we see in the more recent sightings. There's one account from Devon, England, in the early 1960s. An unlikely place for such a figure, granted, but strange things can find their way here too. It was 1962, early morning, and a local shepherd named Albert Fisher was out on the moors, his flock grazing around him. Imagine the smell of damp earth and the mist rolling low over the heather. Suddenly, a strange sound split the quiet, a deep, mournful wail with a static undertone echoing across the empty moorlands. Albert couldn't shake the feeling that something was pulling him toward it, that he had to see the source. And then, through the fog, he saw it. A skeletal figure, impossibly tall, with sirens where its head should have been, standing silent in the mist. Years later, when he described it to a paranormal investigator, Albert spoke of its movements as unnaturally smooth, stretching and bending reality itself. That was the only English sighting I've come across for Siren Head. Albert swore until his dying day that what he'd seen that morning wasn't a man and wasn't a ghost either. It was something entirely other. And more recently, in 2004, I logged an encounter myself near the Forest of Dean. The village on the edge of the forest had started reporting strange noises, siren sounds mixed with crackling voices, like distorted radio interference, echoing out of the woods. At first, the villagers dismissed it as pranksters with a loudspeaker, but as the nights dragged on, the sounds persisted, moving through the forest as though something was watching from the dark. Eventually, a couple from the village decided to investigate. They didn't get far before they saw it. A figure taller than any tree, its body skeletal and twisted, with sirens for a head. The air around it grew heavy, as though reality itself was bending in its presence. They said the sirens twisted with a creak, and they had the sense it was listening. I interviewed them shortly after. They could barely get the words out, still shaken even weeks later. The husband, a former police officer, said he felt as though the creature's very presence warped the world around it. So is Siren Head real? It depends on what you consider real. Over the years, as I've sifted through countless stories like these, I've come to believe that Siren Head, like many other entities, might be more than just a singular creature. Perhaps it's not even a creature at all, but rather something we've given shape to out of our own fear. Picture it as a boundary marker, a kind of spectral guardian. It doesn't hunt, not exactly, nor does it appear randomly. It seems to show up at times when reality feels thin, or when we're approaching limits we shouldn't test. Maybe it's there not to harm us, but to warn us, to remind us that there are some places we're better off leaving alone. Now, categorizing Siren Head is a bit tricky. Here in the archives, we use a less rigid system than our American counterparts. They like clear distinctions, such as entity type A or type B. But Siren Head defies easy classification, operating on the edge of our understanding. Personally, I'd place it under Class 7th, unclassified dangerous phenomenon. It's neither malevolent nor benign, but something closer to a force of nature, dangerous if provoked, but otherwise content to exist at the periphery. If you're looking for ways to protect yourself, here's what I'd advise. First, trust your instincts. People who encounter Siren Head often report a profound sense of dread, an instinct to get away. That's your mind's way of telling you something is very wrong. Don't ignore it. If you hear strange, distorted siren sounds in a remote place, leave immediately. Head toward populated areas, familiar sounds, or lighted paths. Siren Head seems to avoid human density. Second, never investigate alone. Curiosity killed the cat, and in this line of work, it could get you into serious trouble. Siren Head may not be aggressive, but being in its presence affects reality in ways we don't fully understand. Sometimes it's better to let strange sounds remain a mystery. Lastly, protect your mind. This isn't about carrying talismans or holy symbols, though I won't discourage it. Staying grounded, resisting the lure of curiosity, and keeping a clear head may be the best defenses you have. Siren Head seems to thrive on curiosity, on that urge to draw closer to the unknown. So next time you find yourself wandering the woods and you hear a sound, a warped, distorted siren echoing from a place no siren should be, don't follow it. Don't get curious. Siren Head, if he's there, may be the only warning you'll get that you're stepping where you're not meant to be. Stay safe out there, friends. The archives will always be here to share what we know, but remember, not every mystery is meant to be solved. Some are simply meant to be survived.
Dr. Imogen Grant here, recording for the Bethnal Archives. I've been with the archives for 5 years now, and I've dissected some truly bizarre specimens. But this one, well, it's a case with enough mystery to unsettle even the most seasoned investigator. Brought in by Virgil, our ever-reluctant field agent, who managed to dump this poor creature on me and disappear before I could question him further, it seems to be an incomplete transformation, a tragic halfway point between man and wolver. In Shetland folklore, wolvers are solitary, gentle creatures, but this one was found attempting to break into a farmer's barn near Epping. Before it was dragged here in a body bag, a member of the Specialist Branch's police priest unit confirmed the creature had been shot multiple times by the farmer with regular buckshot. A detail that, given its half-transformed state, may have actually been its undoing. If it had completed its shift, it would likely have required silver to be subdued, as with most of its genus. But here we are with something neither man nor beast, half vulnerable and wholly pitiful. Judging by its appearance, the transformation stalled partway through, leaving it in a grotesque limbo. Its skin is coarse and bristled in some areas, like a wolver's, while mottled with patches of human flesh that seem to have resisted the shift. Thus, its hands are particularly unsettling. What should be paws are instead elongated fingers tipped with dull claws. The musculature is partly animal, but the ligaments and tendons resemble those of a human. It's as though every fiber of its being was caught in a tug of war between two species, and the strain proved too great. There's an unmistakable tragedy in that, don't you think? A creature torn between instincts it couldn't reconcile. Then there's the matter of how it died. As I mentioned, the farmer reported using standard buckshot. No silver, no enchanted rounds, none of the specialized ammunition usually necessary to bring down creatures of this nature. A completed wolver would have likely shrugged off the shots, regenerating almost instantly unless silver was involved. But this one was vulnerable, caught in a state that made it unfinished. The transformation, by halting halfway, seems to have stripped it of the resilience its kind is known for. An irony, isn't it? If it had simply finished, it might still be alive, though I suppose the consequences for that farmer and his barn might have been far more severe. Let's continue with the examination. The face is particularly distressing, frozen in what I can only describe as desperation. The muzzle is only half-formed, with a jaw that seems caught in mid-shift, the canines elongated but uneven, as if the creature's body simply gave up. Even the teeth are mismatched, a mix of sharp and blunt, a halfway point between human molars and wolfish incisors. It's as though the transformation was abandoned, leaving it to suffer in this in-between state. Bullet wounds are clustered over the brow and chest, 2 clean entries just above the eyes, 3 more over the left side of the chest. Standard ammunition, the farmer claims, but thorough, almost as if he knew what he was up against. I wonder what went through this creature's mind as it stumbled toward that barn. Was it hunger, or perhaps just confusion, driven by instinct? Imagine, half man, half animal, every sense heightened, but with a body that refuses to listen. It's not hard to picture it pacing in front of the barn door, the light spilling out and confusing its mind further. Perhaps it wasn't attacking at all, just reaching out in confusion, some forgotten memory of shelter or warmth, leading it to the only illuminated place in the dark. There's a tragedy in that, as if its struggle was never about violence, but simply finding a place to rest. Turning to the internal organs now. The lungs are shredded, likely from the chest shots. The heart shows a puncture in the left ventricle with a bullet embedded deep in the muscle. No sign of rapid healing whatsoever, which is unexpected for its species. True wolvers are resilient, known for their capacity to regenerate. Yet here, there's nothing. It was simply bleeding out like any ordinary creature, which reinforces the idea that its half-state rendered it helpless. In a way, it was betrayed by its own nature, unable to access the very powers that would typically define it. Examining the spine, I see further signs of this arrested development. The vertebrae show an unusual fusion in some places, as if the body was attempting to extend, only to be held back. It's like an attempt to elongate that simply stopped. The spine itself is a testament to the violence of this transformation gone awry. Every fused joint is evidence of strain, tension, a body at war with itself. It's unsettling, truly, to witness such a biological contradiction laid bare. And then there's Virgil, gruff, dismissive, the type to roll his eyes when I asked him for the details he was, no doubt, capable of providing. He didn't stick around, of course, dropped off this tragic thing as if it were an inconvenient parcel, then muttered something about, "You'll handle it," before slipping away like he always does. I'd like to say it doesn't bother me, the way he offloads his cases without a second thought, but it does. It bothers me more than it should. He's a mystery in himself, infuriatingly indifferent, and yet there's a part of me that keeps hoping he'll show some sort of engagement, but that's neither here nor there. Now the teeth. Most of the molars are intact, but the canines are a different story. They're longer, sharper, almost like a wolf's, but uneven. The gum line is receding in some places, as if it didn't have the resources to finish growing. And the tongue is, well, it's split. One side is broad and fleshy, and the other is nearly skeletal, lined with serrated edges, almost like a predator's barbed tongue. It's a fascinating, if not disturbing, reminder of just how incomplete this creature was. Given the state of decomposition and the circumstances surrounding its death, I'd estimate it died no more than 12 hours before Virgil brought it in. The farmer did his job well, though I doubt he realizes the significance of what he shot down. Normally, I'd assign it a classification and send it to storage. But given the complexity, and frankly the heartbreak of this case, I think I'll write up a full report and send it to Felix instead. He'll want to examine the details himself, perhaps even determine if this is a unique incident or part of something larger. There's an eerie weight to this creature, as if it carries within it the echoes of an ancient mistake, one that nature never intended. Or perhaps someone out there is attempting transformations on the unwilling, reaching into the dark places and pulling at the old threads of power. And if so, perhaps there are more of these creatures waiting, some that might not be as vulnerable, some that may complete the shift fully. A troubling thought, but one worth investigating further.
The Bethnal Archives are never quiet. Not really. Even in the dead of night, with the rain drumming against the thick glass and the smell of damp earth rising from the stones, there's a certain hum to this place. Maybe it's the weight of all the stories, all the things we've kept sealed up and hidden. I suppose you could call it the heartbeat of the archives, if you're feeling poetic. Today, though, the air feels heavier than usual, a thick, stale sort of weight clinging to the corners. The walls themselves seem to be holding their breath, waiting. Hello, Edward here, Global Affairs Officer, handling the uncanny cases that don't pose an immediate threat to His Majesty's Britannia. Most of the time, that is. I've been here long enough to know when things are about to go sideways. Today is one of those days. You see, lately, we've been fielding calls from across London about what they think is a particularly nasty strain of chickenpox. These cases aren't exactly the usual itchy red spots we all know. No, this variant is lethal. People have been dying, and fast, within a few days of the first symptoms appearing. Modern medicine, antivirals, nothing seems to be working. But here's the thing. I know what we're dealing with isn't chickenpox. It's something older, something that slipped through the cracks before. It's him again, the Pox Man. Now let me give you some context. The Pox Man isn't like most of the entities we track. We're not talking about a wandering spirit or a lost soul, nor some creature that's crawled out from beneath a rock. The Pox Man is an old pestilence, a lesser demon banished from hell centuries ago, left to wander the world and spread disease wherever he's shunned. He's been around since the days of the Black Death, haunting cities and villages, taking on the form of a beggar. If you know what to look for, you might notice him. A hunched, shabby figure at the edge of the street, his clothes tattered, his skin covered in red, festering sores. People think he's just a poor soul down on his luck, and in a way, he is. But those who turn him away, who refuse him shelter or food, soon find themselves struck with something far worse than remorse. They're left with a curse, an invisible miasma that clings to their clothes, to their homes, and spreads like wildfire. The first confirmed encounter with him on record goes back to 1352, shortly after the height of the Black Death. He was spotted in a small English village that had somehow managed to avoid the plague up until then. A hunched figure appeared at the edge of the village asking for bread, shelter, anything to ease his hunger. But they turned him away. Within days, the village was struck by the plague, one of the worst outbreaks in the area. That account was buried in old parish records until the archives took hold of it, a centuries-old warning that we're still trying to learn from. Now I'd love to tell you that the Pox Man is a tale of the past, a relic we've managed to contain. But here's the truth. We've captured him twice over the years, trapped him, and locked him away. First in 1793, when the archives were just beginning to take shape. He'd been spreading a strange fever through London, a plague that left people with burning skin and filled the air with the smell of rot. The archivists back then managed to trap him in a specially prepared iron box, reinforced with salt and charms from the local priests. They thought they'd contained him for good, but without knowing his true name, his demon name, we can't hold him forever. He always slips free sooner or later. The second time was during the 1889 flu pandemic. He showed up in Whitechapel, wearing the guise of a ragged vagrant with a hacking cough. He'd ask for coins or bread, anything that would give him reason to linger. People thought he was just one of many poor souls left behind, but within days, those he encountered were fevered and bedridden. By then, the archives knew what they were dealing with. They captured him in a containment ward in the East End, locked him up in a reinforced cell, but like before, he vanished after a few years. It's the name, you see. Until we learn his true name, he'll keep slipping out of our grasp. And now he's back. But this time, he's taken on a new form, a twisted version of chickenpox that's proven resistant to all known treatments. The spots appear on the skin like regular chickenpox at first, but then they deepen, darkening to a sickly purple, festering as the fever rises. Within hours, the victim's pulse weakens, their skin takes on a waxy texture, and their eyes glaze over as if they're looking at something no one else can see. Death comes within days, sometimes hours. He's refined his curse, made it adapt to modern medicine, like he's mocking our attempts to stop him. I'll tell you how I know it's him. Last week, we received a report from a hospital in East London. A nurse swore she'd seen an old man sitting by the bed of one of these new chickenpox victims, dressed in rags with open sores covering his face and hands. She'd asked him to leave, said he wasn't supposed to be there. The man gave her a look she described as hungry, spiteful, then hobbled out of the room. The patient died that night, and within days the nurse came down with the same symptoms. She's in critical condition now, and doctors don't know how much longer she has. We're not taking any chances this time. I've been preparing the containment measures, pulling out every charm, every ritual we have on file. We're consulting demonologists, historians, anyone who might have a clue about his true name. And if we don't find it, well, I'll do what I can to keep him contained as long as possible. But I'll be honest, without that name, we're playing a losing game. Now, if you ever find yourself approached by someone fitting his description, a beggar with sores, a voice like gravel, a stare that sends a chill through your bones, heed my warning. Do not engage. Don't give him food, don't offer him shelter, and for heaven's sake, don't meet his gaze. Walk away. The poxman feeds on rejection, on being turned away. It gives him a reason to spread his curse. If you ignore him, he may move on. But if you engage, you might as well be inviting the disease into your home. Here's how we're handling things on our end, in case it helps. First, salt barriers. Salt, especially blessed salt, disrupts demonic entities like him. Lay it around your home, your doorways, even your bed if you're feeling particularly cautious. Second, protective charms. These can be anything with personal significance, an heirloom, a cross, anything you believe has power. The poxman is an entity of decay. Symbols of life, health, and resilience weaken his influence. And lastly, avoid hospitals or any place where outbreaks are rampant. If he's active, he'll linger where disease spreads most easily. I'll do everything I can to lock him down again, to buy us more time. But in the end, without his name, we're fighting an uphill battle. This is the true nature of the poxman, a disease that can't be cured, only contained, a shadow slipping through the years, spreading pestilence wherever he's been cast out. He's more than a beggar, more than a demon. He's a reminder lurking at the edge of society that some horrors can never be fully eradicated. Given what we know about the poxman, I'd categorize him under Class 9 recurring infectious entity. This category is reserved for entities that function almost like sentient diseases, intelligent, relentless, and designed to adapt and spread, using both physical and supernatural means. The poxman isn't merely an infection, he's a walking plague with agency. His purpose seems to be pure, calculated contagion, each outbreak more adapted to resist whatever defenses we've developed since his last appearance. He falls somewhere between a demonic manifestation and a viral curse, an entity whose primary weapon is sickness itself. His classification as class wine underscores the nature of the threat. A demon of pestilence who can't simply be exorcised or avoided, but who needs active containment measures, a recurring curse rather than an isolated phenomenon. His very presence amplifies sickness, making even small illnesses lethal. Without his true name, he can't be permanently bound, so containment remains our only option. For something as relentless as him, we'd mark him with a special advisory warning, a rare label we reserve for entities whose nature requires immediate response and public caution. So stay vigilant, stay safe, and remember, not every sickness has a cure.